Welcome back. I'm Luke Saunders, and today we're going to explore IBM's SaaS Integration Hub and how it's used to offer enterprise integration capabilities. Today's agenda, we're going to cover various topics. First, we're going to look at what does IBM's B2B integration offer. We'll then look at IBM's B2B Hub. We'll then explore and do a live demo of IBM Sterling Integrator and how that can be used to perform transformations. We'll then review IBM's B2B solution and see what the pros and cons of that are. And then we'll finish up with some closing thoughts. So, what does IBM's SaaS B2B solution offer? Well, firstly, it's a single B2B solution. So held within it are all the capabilities you need in order to provide EDI and potentially API interfaces. So it's a SaaS-based solution with tooling for integration. It provides a web portal for querying data, reviewing errors, and gaining statistics. It also enables partner setup. So we've got enablement here for the setup of trading partners and the configuration of that particular partner. It also allows the flow of data to be routed based on content for that particular partner. We then have different connectivity capabilities here as well. It provides SFTP, and that can be connecting to a trading partner, or via the actual hub itself, you can set up a cloud-based SFTP directly into IBM that way. It also offers AS2, and there is capability there for HTTP or API endpoints there as well. As well as the connectivity, we've also got the data transformation capabilities, and this is provided via the Sterling Integrator Map Editor tool. So let's look at the IBM Hub. So the main elements of the hub we're going to be looking at today are the configuration hub. So the configuration hub enables you to set up new translation maps, and it also offers the map test tool in order to be able to test those maps before potentially you set those up or before you proceed to upload a new version. As well as the configuration hub, you also have Inflight, and it's Inflight that gives you the ability to view the monitoring and inspect transactions and transformations. And it's here where you can actually view and download the content of the data for both inbound and outbound. Now, what I think will be quite good is for us to actually view a transaction and go through how the hub works in a live demo. So on logging into IBM, you then reach the integration hub, and you've got your main options on the left-hand side here. So here we're going to be looking at the configuration hub, and then we'll be reviewing the Inflight. So if we start with the integration hub, we load that up. This will then load up a list of our current transformation maps that we've got set up in the system at the moment. And we can see that we've got none available. That means that we've got none that are there, ready and set up. We've got 3 checked out that are currently being worked on, which are these 3 here. They're work in progress. And we've got nothing locked. So here where we've got our work in progress, we can see that we've got these 3 maps that are currently being controlled or modified by these 3 users here. However, even though they are being kind of checked out and worked on, we're still able to select these and review and download the current version of map that is deployed at the moment. So if we look at our mapping versions, we've got nothing in production, and in our test CTE we've got version 1.1, and it says when it was deployed, and we're able to actually download the source, the input, and the compiled map, and any of the other auxiliary files that we want there related to this particular map. Now, the person that's got this checked out will also be able to hit upload, and they can upload a source map, the compiled map, and the input file. So these three are all required in order to upload a new version. When they then do that, they can select deploy this, the new uploaded version to test, and later they can also come back to that and also deploy that to production. And when they do that, you'll then see you've got a version in production and a version in test, CTE. Now, they can be the same version, or it could be that you've got a current version in test, which is 1.2, but your production is 1.1. So you've got full kind of version control. You're able to go back, download it, review it, etc. So really, that's what the configuration hub is mainly used for, in order to create and add a new map, but also to be able to increase and change based on your business requirements. Now, within the configuration hub, you also then have access to the map test tool, and it's here where you can actually go in, you can upload your compiled map as a minimum and an input file as a minimum, and run a test and see what the output is from that particular map, which again is really useful in order to test and make sure everything is working as expected before you would then go into your maps and actually go through and upload or amend, etc., the mapping translation there. So that's really the core purpose of the configuration hub. So now let's review the Inflight. So Inflight is where we go if we want to see what's going on, what's been logged, and what's been monitored. So here you get presented with quite a nice dashboard. It gives you a view of the last 24 hours for inbound and for outbound. And here you can quite quickly see and view what successes, what failures you've had, anything that's stuck in processed, etc. If you wanted to search for a particular file here, you can choose the burger menu, you can go search for documents, and then you can search based on date ranges, on sender or receiver IDs, etc. If I just do a blanket search, we'll get a list of files that we've had come through. So here we can see we've got the type of file, we've got the sender and receiver here. So if I select one of these, it will then open up and give me a full view. So here we've got an invoice file, and we can see the source file name coming in. So we've got an edifact file with a .txt extension that comes in. We then have a map name here of edifact underscore demo out invoice D96A. And then we also will have a destination file name as well being translated from that. So what we're able to do here is we're able to see the various events related to this single document coming through. So if I look at received, we can see that we've had a file come through. And looking at this, we can see we've got a fixed text file come through. And then if we look at sent, the data being sent, we've got our edifact file there. So we can very quickly see what data we've had come in, what's come out, and whether it's been successful or not. And within here, for both of those, you can actually download a copy of this file for review. So it's very useful in order to understand what files have come in and what potential errors they may have been. And here, if we look, we've got a failed one. We can select this particular file. We can see the data that's been received. Okay, look, we've got a edifact file that's come through and it's errored. So we're able to go through, have a look at the translation report and very quickly see where we've had some failures. So here we've got the BGM record where we've got a potential issue because that's missing, and it will highlight exactly where they are, what iteration within the file it is, and any additional information related to that error. And using this information, we can then go through, we can download the received file, we can go into our configuration hub, download the latest version or the version that this was affected by, and we're able to use the map test tool and some testing in order to try and understand what that issue is and potentially identify if it's missing data, which quite clearly on here we're missing the BGM entry here, so it quite likely is, or whether there is possibly a problem in the map that's causing the error as well. So we can retest that with some valid data to see whether, okay, it's a data issue and we need to speak to our third party about it, or whether it's actually a problem with the map itself, where either we need to have a look at it or we need to report it to the developer or the analyst that created the map in order to get that corrected. So these are the core functions that are used in the IBM Integration Hub, and they're very useful in order to be able to identify potential issues and audit a trading partner. Now let's take a look at the IBM Sterling Integrator. So what's its purpose? Its main function is around data transformation. It also allows for the lookup of IBM tables that will be stored in the Integration Hub. And used with the hub, it supports full version control. So why choose IBM? Well, it's really an enterprise level integration platform. It's well tested, it's been around for many years, and it's a well-known product in the marketplace. It's fairly simple to coding, and it's code and linked based for transformations. And again, all map releases are automatically versioned, which is really useful in order to identify issues and to manage changes. So let's have a look at a live demo. So for our live demo, we have our input file on the left. This is an IDOC message, and it's a master data record. And here we've got the details of the SKU. I'll zoom this in just to make sure. We've got the SKU, we've got the SKU description, weights and dimensions, etc. And on the right hand side, we've got our output file, and we want to map here to a SKU extract where we're creating an add record, and we've got the client ID, any commodity and color details if we've got those provided, weights and dims, EAN, and then finally the SKU ID. So in order to create a transformation within IBM, we need to launch the map editor. So if I launch the map editor, we then want to create a new map. Now we need to give this particular map a name. So we're going to call it Client X IDOC SKU map. We then hit next. And for this, we need to be able to create or pass two schemas. So in a previous video, I covered Alterva MapForce, where you're able to provide it with an example XML file, and it can basically create an on-the-fly schema that you can use, which you should always review, but it's a quick way of doing that. With the IBM Sterling Map application, it's more strict and it's more defined. So here we need to provide the format for these files. So for the input, we're going to use XML. We need to go to customize, and we need to provide a schema file. So here, if I go schemas, we've got the sample SAP IDOC schema. We can then hit next. It will then show us the root element. That's completely fine. And then we can hit next on this. It will give us a view. We can tick or untick various options. We're just going to go with the standard sub-elements there, and then we can hit finish. So if we hit next, that's our input complete. We then need to do the same with the output. Again, it's XML. We then can go to customize, schema, browse, and then we need to provide the SKU schema for our output file. Hit open, next. It's our extract is our root element. That's absolutely fine. And again, we get our view for our sub-elements there as well. And again, we're going to have all of those there. We then hit finish, next, and finish it again. And what we end up with here, if I make it full screen, actually no, I'll keep it half screen so we can see what we're mapping to on the right hand here. So here we've got our main file on the left, and this breaks down to our various elements here. And on the right, we've got our output. And really what we're doing here is we're then going to be using IBM to map our left-hand elements to our right in order to get our transformation. It's here that I want to run over how it works and also step through the overview of the sort of palette that we've got here. So if we start in the file menu, we've got the ability to open, create new, save, all standard functionality here, but we've also got the option to print a file. Now by selecting print a file, we can actually print to file all the extended rules. So within IBM, and when we go through this map, you'll see that although we can also connect elements, there will be instances where we need to basically code, and that's done using extended rules against an element. So against a particular element, you can go store this here, and then you can map that element across. And what you're able to do here is you're able to print all of those rules to a text file, and then you can use something like Notepad++ to open it up and review all of your rules. And that can be quite nice at a later stage if you want to review some of the code for the various extended rules you're doing, as opposed to going on an individual element and looking at the individual extended rule here. It's just quite a nice way of viewing those particular rules in a single file. So on the edit menu, we've got elements such as session rules. So when you create a map, you'll be baking logic into various different elements within the map. The session rules are basically extended rules that happen pre-reading the file and post-reading the file. So in your pre-session, you can set things like top-level fixed elements maybe. So you might have a client ID or something like that. You may also construct within there potentially the file name for the output, and then in your post session you can then create the file name within that if you wanted as well. So again, it's kind of like a on start and on end extended rules there. You also have the ability in here to set up constants, so you can add new values in here with constant elements that you can then reference within the map. Again, wherever possible with anything within integration, you really want to avoid having kind of fixed text baked within the code. So having some map constraints and some new elements in here that you can basically go, well, I want a string, I want to call it X, and I want to give it value. It means you can reference that throughout your whole map, and later if you need to change that, you change it in one place. As well as that, you also have code lists, so you can create a new code list table and various elements for that as well. Now that may be useful here. You may also want to create what's known as an IBM table, which sits outside of the map, but you can basically reference that within extended rules in order to do lookups there. And it tries to abstract the logic between the business logic within your map and basically a value pair key listing within a table somewhere else. So they're the main functions really within the edit menu. There are a lot of functions within the application itself, but I'm really just focusing on the core ones here. And then you've got various different options to expand or unexpand branches and various elements there as well. So really that's kind of the overview of the palette. So now what we want to do is we want to actually start coding the solution. There are two main things that you need to really consider with the Sterling map editor. Firstly, when you're looking at the data, it's all nodal, and the way IBM works is it's literally top down. So what you need to realize is it reads completely top down. So if you were going to access elements down here and you wanted to reference something up here, you need to be able to store that in order to add both of these to a particular structure. So it's just something you need to bear in mind that works differently from a lot of other integration tools I've used before. Secondly, unlike other tools like MapForce, although you completely can and it's valid to map particular elements, so let me just open an element that's also a string. So if we go to the mapner here, that you can then link these two elements up. But you'll notice within IBM, you'll get a warning. And this warning basically relates to the fact that when you're mapping something in IBM, the structures need to be at the right depth. And what I mean by the right depth, I mean the same depth. So here we come 1, 2, 3, and then we've got it as the fourth one here. However, the mapner, which is basically the product ID here, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's sort of 6 deep. So it's deeper than the element on the right hand side. And here lies the main kind of thought process and the main process in itself in mapping files in IBM. You've got your main document here for the inbound. What you really want to do is create a temporary model underneath the inbound entity. And then what you can do is as you read through the inbound file, you can then start building up a model of this output here on the left hand side. When you complete that, you can then basically tie up and link all the elements that you want between this new temporary model and the actual output on the right hand side. Now you don't have to do it that way, but really it's the best practice in order to do that. What I tend to do is I tend to copy the output and I'll then paste that on the left hand side. And actually I'm going to just remove that and paste it back in here at the same level afterwards. So what you end up with is basically a duplication on the left hand side, our input to the output. So we can map to this and then we can do our tying up to all of this on the right hand side. Now, so what we have to be aware of is we've now done that, which is great, but what we've really got to be aware of is at the moment we've added a new structure, new data structure to the input, and we're saying it's mandatory. So what we've basically done right this minute is we said we've got a mapner file here and we are expecting a SKU input, but we're not. So we need to go in here and to make it really apparent, I like naming everything TMP to show that it's temporary and it's not a real element. And we also need to make this conditional because it's not going to come in as part of the input. We're actually going to be populating it as part of reading our main input entity here. And again, I need to do the same here. So if I go on here, well, technically I don't because I'm always going to create a SKU. So actually I can leave that. This particular entity takes care of the fact that it is a conditional element. And if we create this element, which we'll talk about how we do that in our extended rules, then we're going to have the subsequent elements as part of that. We're going to have a SKU because we're going to have the extract. We're always going to have a SKU. So that's something we really need to be aware of. And then what we can do is we can do a little bit of housekeeping and we can go through now we've got a representation of our output on this side. We can go through and for each one of these, we can go through and basically tie it up to the output side. So here, where we've got all of these, and I'm just opening these up just to make it a little bit easier to see and a little bit easier to track. And we may or may not be creating all of these elements, but some of them are going to be quite apparent that we need. So because I know this data format that we've got here, we always need to have a record type. So we're gonna map that. We're also gonna always map the client ID. That's fine. Color, commodity code, potentially something we're gonna look at. For this example, again, we're gonna make it quite straightforward and quite simple. We're not gonna worry about that. Description. I mean, we're always going to need a description for the product. For the depth, height, etc., we're going to leave those because as part of the warehouse process, when they first receipt, they're going to check that, and that's part of the process. So we're not so worried about having that being set. We do need an each quantity because we want to know how many is going to be in each box by default. And then we want an EAN to identify the product. And if we go all the way down, we're going to flag that it's a new product because each one we're going to have coming in is going to represent a new product. And then we also need the SKU ID. So we've now linked, and we're able to unlink by toggling here anything that we want to potentially unlink for that. So we've now got these linked, and we've now got a representation of what we want to link in here. But this at the moment isn't going to work. And what I'm going to do, just for the sake of process, I'm going to just create a save of this SKU here. So I've got a previous one I created, just so we're saving where we are at the moment. So we've got this saved. At the moment, this isn't going to map anything because we've got an input coming in. IBM potentially is going to go through, read all of this, and then it will have nothing put into here. So we'll basically just end up with blank. There'll be nothing there. Potentially, if we were to run this through the map test tool, we will get some potential errors because we'll be mapping nothing on this side. So now we need to go through and start looking at our data. So if I move this over to this side, because we're dealing with our sort of input data at the moment, we need to start identifying what fields here we need to look at. So the MATNA, for instance, we know is a SKU, and it's the product. So then we need to look at, okay, where's that going to hit? So we are always then going to get this particular element here. And for the sake of this example, we're going to make it really straightforward. We're going to say that we only ever receive a single file with a single product. If we were to receive multiple and the data format denoted that, this would actually be a repeating element, and then we would actually be able to do an extended rule on this and have a counter where we could go, right, record 1, record 2, record 3, etc. We're going to make this really straightforward, and in doing this, we're just going to say we always have one record, so we haven't got to deal with the complexity of having a counter, even though that's not really that complex. We're just trying to make this example fairly straightforward. So what we'd need to do is we'd need to then go on the extended rules, and we'd need to then code in here that we want to take this MATNA value here, and we'd want to push it into the SKU ID. Now, in order to do that, we need to reference the name of the SKU ID. So here, if I just close this and reopen it, just because it will make that a little bit easier on screen, we've got a SKU ID _2 here. So this is the name of the field, and you'll notice that, hang on a minute, the field name isn't 2. Why has it got that there? So every field on the left-hand side and the right-hand side have to be uniquely named. It's the way IBM Integrator works. So where you've duplicated an element, so we've got an element already here on the right hand side of the output called SKU ID, it will just add a 2 or a 3 or a 4, etc. However, the actual name itself will be SKU ID, but if we ever want to map to it or reference it, need to reference it by its actual name element. So what we need to do is we need to go into extended rules, and here we would go, we want to make that value equal to the MATNA field. And again, if we ever want to see how this is coded, what the format is, we've got a help option here, and there's various different libraries about searching for strings within a string. There are various other functions where we're able to go, actually, we want to take the left 50 characters, and that may be the case because we've got a limit on SKU ID length. So again, that will be the case there. So to check this, we then hit compile. Now we do that and we get a SKU ID 2 has not been defined. Well, it has been. However, with IBM, we've got to remember we need indices, and we've got to be able to reference down to where that element is. So that element is part of SKU. So what we need to do is we go $SKU dot hash, and then the element. So what we're saying is we're saying this parent and this child. So we then hit compile, and we then hit a problem here. It's saying there's insufficient indices. So even though we've got the parent-child relationship here, with IBM, you've got to tell it how deep this particular element is. So in doing that, we then need to say, well, okay, it's actually too deep. So we go, it's too deep, and we're always dealing with one. So this is what we're talking about with regards to counters. So we've got the extract, and then we've got the actual skew element, and then we've got the child here. So if I hit compile, that will now compile without issue. If we were iterating on multiple segments here for different parts, we would then create an extended rule on the parent. We would have a counter, and here we're always talking about a single extract, but we might have multiple skews. Here you could put your counter here, and that would then be iterated each time. But again, as I discussed just a minute ago, we're dealing with one-on-one, so that's fine. So what that does, if we hit OK, is it stars this so that we're aware that it's got an extended rule, and it's going to drop that value in on here. And again, we need to do that with any other element. So if we've got an element with a description somewhere, we then need to do that. And then the same for the various other elements that we want to link on here. We may have some fixed values. So there may be a need to have some fixed values on there. So things like client ID and the record type, we've already seen that those are going to be add, and the client ID here would be, let's say, client X. So here we could create, either we can go and add it in here. We can have an extended rule here. So if I copy this, we could have here another line where we're going, we don't, not skew ID, we're going to say actually record type 2 equals add. And that should compile, and that would then set the record type here. We might go, actually, we don't want to have add there. What we're going to do is we're just going to leave that blank just to set that. And then within this particular record, we want to set a standard rule, and we're going to use a constant. And we're going to go into here, we're going to go new, and we can call this record type. We can go, this is a string, and we're going to use the value add here. There we go. And then we can set that as a default value. Then in theory, no matter what we would put in here, it would always default to that value. Generally speaking, you can also set those on the input or the input side. But for me, I tend to always like to set this on the output side. It's just cleaner. It's a cleaner area. So I tend to keep the code side on the left and any values on the right. So now we've done that, we should probably do the same for the client ID. So again, as we were before, we might want to do the client ID here. Client ID 2, again, because it's called client ID 2. We might want to go on here and then we go client A or whatever. But here again, we're going to go into client ID. We're going to go properties, standard rule, use constant. Yeah, we want to use a constant, and you can see we've got our list already, but we need to addition this. So we're going to go new. This is going to be client ID. It's a type string, and this is client X. Close that down. We can now select client X, hit OK, and there we go. It's starred out there, so we know that that field's being set. Okay, so the next one, each quantity. Now, as part of this, we're always saying we're going to have 1. So we can basically set that as a default. So again, the same as we've had on here. Let's just scroll down. What have we called that particular field? Each quantity, there we go. Each quantity 2. And again, here it will say whether it's mandatory or whether it's optional. So some of these are mandatory and some of them are optional, and you can tick or untick whether they're mandatory and optional on there. So we might actually want to look through and consider what is mandatory and what is optional and what we may or may not need. So we might need to edit this to denote we're not so worried about certain elements on there. We might want to default, for instance, the dimensions, and then in the system, every time the product first turns up, they'll do their checks. So we'll see. But I think for the sake of this one, we're going to go through and we're going to check and set the each quantity. So again, we're setting it on the one field here that we know we're always going to have as part of the EDI input in. And again, this isn't necessarily, you know, the be all and end all. You don't have to do it this way. There may well be different ways you want to do it. With IBM Integrator, there are various different ways of achieving the same thing. And again, because this is a integer, it's a numerical field, we're putting through a numeric here as well. It is not a member of SKU. So what have I done incorrectly here? Client ID, capital C, capital I. So there you go. So I didn't actually validate this earlier, but again, it's case sensitive. There we go. So we're able to set that. We've got that one being set. That's being mapped through. So that's great. So the next one, we want the EAN. So let's have a look at the EAN. And where do we get that supplied? We need to look on the left and see where an EAN is being passed. So we can do a control find EAN. There you go. EAN 11 is supplied here. I just couldn't see it for seeing. We've got this element here. So what we're then able to do is we can go in here. I know EAN is a string, so let's just take that for example. We go on here, we go extended rule, sorry, we can populate that in here. This field is called EAN 11, and we need to put a hash there, and that field is going to be called, if we have a look, it's just EAN. So EAN, and it will be colon 2 because we've duplicated there earlier. Hit compile, and again that works. So we've now got the EAN populated. Now we need to do the SKU ID. Oh no, we've already done the SKU ID on that, I think. Let me just double check. Going on here, yeah, we've got the SKU ID. So we've got the SKU ID, we've got the client. I think there we've probably got everything we needed to. Oh no, we want to have the new product. So we want to have the new product flag. So if I copy this, new product is capital N, capital P, product 2, and we're going to go, yes, this is a new product. Compile that, that's all okay. Perfect. So we've got our very simple map there, just to put that together. And from there, we can do a compile. So if we compile this here, it will tell us if there are any errors. So there's no errors from a coding perspective for this particular map. What we then need to do is we then need to test this in the map test tool and see whether we get any errors there based on the sample that we have on the left hand side here. Now, in real terms, we're going to base it just on this one example. It could be that we have multiple test cases, multiple examples, missing data, etc., that we need to go through and we need to test. But we do need to use a real example to test that. So we're going to use the example on the left. Something that we need to be, or you need to be very aware of, is a lot of integration tools are quite forgiving when it comes to additional elements. So what do I mean by that? If a client was to provide a field EAN 12 and that was an additional field that may or may not be there. They've just added it in. If we were to deploy a map into production and they made that change to the data, everything else is exactly the same, but they've put an additional field within the XML file, most integration tools would just be like, yeah, that's fine. It might give a warning, but that's fine. With IBM, because it's quite a strict integration tool, it is likely to error because it is very defined, it's very explicit, and the whole idea is you should really be ensuring that you're testing, that you're aware, and you're communicating with all parties any changes that you're making. So if a client was going to say and provide a new field, even if they were not going to populate it, they should really let you know. And then you can either rebuild this map as we've just gone through now by creating it with the new schema, or you can actually insert a new element, and with the details they provide, you can just shoehorn that element in. If it's only a couple of elements, it's potentially a lot easier just to add them in manually, as opposed to completely redoing the map that we've got now. So there are some nuances with the IBM integrator that you need to be aware of when it comes to things like that. Okay, so with this complete, I think this is a good time to then look at how we would then test this in the map test tool. Okay, so using the map test tool, we can then find our sample file, and then we can find our compiled map that we've completed, which is this file here. We can then run our test, which is going to read through our input file, add it using the indices that we've created for our temporary element, and that's going to map across to create our output. Now this is just finished running, and we can see we've got transformation failed. Now from here, we can see we've got our SKU ID mapped. Okay, that's great. New product, we've got that mapped. That's great. We've got our EAN mapped. Let's move this over to this side. Yep. So we've got our EAN mapped. That's all working out okay. We've got our new record ID. Let's move this over here. Record ID add, client ID, client X, fixed quantity there, and everything else is empty. So that's okay. Oh, okay. We will need to have a look at the description, but other than that, the output looks okay. But we've got a transformation error, so we can have a look at the transformation test report, and we can see here what's wrong. So here we've got a count frequency here where it's mandatory and it's not being set. So if we go to count frequency, we can see here we've got an integer, and if we go on properties, we've got it set as mandatory. So because of that, this is actually failing. So we need to understand, is that a problem with the data, or is that actually a problem with the map and these aren't actually mandatory? Now, for the sake of this, we're going to say they're not actually mandatory. So if that's the case, we need to go through, we need to change these and make them optional. And then we need to have a look at the description as well, because I'd like to have that populated. So in order to fix these, we now need to go through and basically untick the mandatory requirement for the fields here that we've got set currently, where we don't actually have a mandatory requirement. So again, here, this is an example of where MapForce is IBM is very strict in what it's wanting us set here. And we need to make sure that we adhere to those requirements. So we've gone through there, and that should hopefully resolve it. We can then hit recompile. So we're going to do that now, and then we can also have a look at correcting the description side. So if I do that now, I can go across here. I can then point it to the updated build. I can then rerun this, and hopefully then we should get a successful output and transformation. And there we have it. We've got a successful transformation. So now we need to have a look at the description field, because this is empty and it's something that we really should be populating. So if we go over to our file here, we can see we've got the description element, which is at this element here, and we've actually got 4 iterations of this. And if we look here, we've got an ISO, so we've got a DE, so we've got a German description, We've got an English description. We've then got JA, I'm not too sure what that is, but we've got another description there, and then we've got the Spanish description. So for this particular instance, we want the English description. So if we just go through and have a look and find that element, TKM here, we can go into here and then we can go and start creating an extended rule. So if I was to put an extended rule in here to set the description field, that would work. However, it would be incorrect, because what will end up happening is for every one of these iterations, it's going to look at this field and it's going to populate the description. It won't build the string up, so it won't be 4 descriptions. It will just populate description. It will then overwrite it with this description, overwrite it with this description, and you'll end up with a Spanish description, which is not what we want. So because this element here is a repeating element, we can go on to the extended rules, and we've got an on begin and we have an on end. On begin, we would use if we wanted to set any variables at the beginning of each iteration. On end is what we want to do when we've read the content of each iteration. So on end, we basically want to be able to do this. So I've just pasted this in here, but we want to do an if statement. We want to say if the ISO is EN here, we then want to take this description and we want to populate it. And that's what we're doing here. So we are going to limit this to 100 characters. That's fine. We'll take the left 100, and it will mean that it will iterate. It will hit this 4 times, but it'll only go in the then part of the if statement when it's an English description. So if I hit compile, that's all okay. Hit OK, hit save, and then we're going to compile this. Make sure we don't have any errors. That's all good. And then we can go back to our map test tool, and using the same example, we can go and upload the new compiled version and run the test. And what we're expecting to see here are no errors, as we had before, but we are expecting the description to be populated with the English description. There we go. So it has passed, and we've got a description of EP Notebook Professional 15. So if I go and open this up, EP Notebook Professional 15. Fantastic. So again, this is a very simple example, but we have completed a transformation. We've tested it in the map test tool. And from here, we would then be able to go into map listings. We would then add a map, and we can actually publish that map to the integration hub in order to tie that up to a third party in order to put that in place. So I think this is a good point to stop. We've now covered a very simple transformation using the Sterling Integrator map editor tool. So let's now look at the pros and cons of the IBM B2B solution. So firstly, the pros. So it's an enterprise level integration product. It's been around for many years. There are lots of consultants that have many years of experience within this product, and it's very well tested and known in the current marketplace. It's also quite a straightforward and simple tool to use from a mapping perspective as well. So fairly easy to use, and again, well tested enterprise level integration tool. However, that said, there are some cons. I believe it's not as simple to use as some other alternatives like MapForce and TIBCO. And also from a UI perspective, it's not as user friendly. I mean, you can tell it's not as fresh and new tech looking. It's still sort of quite old in the way that the UI looks. That's not really a problem, but I would say things like some of the testing capabilities, the map test tool, and identifying some of the issues are not as well laid out and as apparent as some of the other newer technologies that are out there. However, other than that, it is still a very good tool. I think IBM sell Integrator. I've used it for a couple of years now, and although it can be frustrating, it is what I would call bomb-proof when it comes to sort of integration and scaling. And it really is aimed at enterprise-sized businesses. So I do feel like it is a very good solution for that. Let me know what you think, what your experience of using IBM, and equally if you've used any other integration tools, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Thank you very much.